Hey there, advanced procrastinators. Welcome back to Study Guide Chapter 3 for our review for the AP exam. Remember, the version book I'm using is Fast Track to a 5, the 12th and 13th edition. So if you want to have the book at home, this is the book to get. Now, before starting this, these are the questions that should have been answered already by reading the chapter. We are going to be reviewing these 10 questions right now and going over them, as well as the fact that these are embedded checking for understanding questions that you need to answer as we're going through the lecture. So let's get into today's lecture on the Revolutionary War. Now, three things, just maybe when you walk away, do you understand what the importance was of common sense had on our country? So make sure you explain that. Another key idea is the two main ideas in the Declaration of Independence, the basis of being an American today. And then lastly, really think about this. Analyze if the U.S. Revolutionary War was truly revolutionary. So let's talk about the beginning of the war, how it begins. Now, where were the first shots fired? Now, that was at Lexington and Concord. The British Army left in the upper left-hand corner. You can see the map where the British Army leaves Boston on to Concord to try to get an armory, a cache of weapons before the American rebels do. Now, this is obviously, you can see Paul Revere on his famous ride, warning Americans that the British are coming out to Lexington and Concord. Now, what happens at Lexington is about 90 Americans line up against 600 British troops, and there's an accidental discharge of a rifle. The British troops open fire on the Americans at Lexington as the Americans were given ground, and there are about a dozen Americans that are dead after that battle. Then the British move on to Concord, and when the British get to Concord, the Americans are there ready for the Brits. And at Concord, the Americans fight back using guerrilla tactics, hiding behind trees, and there are about 300 British casualties. About half their troops are either shot or killed in this battle. Now, why is Lexington and Concord so important? Think about it for 1 second. Basically, what's happened is you've had shots that have been fired. This is the beginning of the war. Lexington's known as a shot heard around the world. There is no going back. So all the other protesting that we talked about in the previous chapter that Americans are doing, now there's been actual fighting and English blood has been shed. Now, shortly after it, the Americans, there's the first major battle of the war, which is the Battle of Bunker Hill in Boston. And this was important because in this battle, the Americans, you can see, had the high ground in the middle image there, right? While the Brits kept going up the hill thinking they could overpower the Americans. And the British went up the hill several times. And the only reason why the Brits won this battle is that the Americans ran out of ammunition. And then the Americans retreated after running out of ammunition. Now, the importance of the Bunker Hill was it showed that, yeah, maybe Americans were willing here to fight. Okay. Now, after this happens, the first Continental Congress is still meeting, and now it's the Second Continental Congress, and they pass the Olive Branch Petition asking the king that, look, the American colonies, Lexington, Concord, Bunker Hill, have all happened in Massachusetts. But the other 12 American colonies, they're not ready for independence yet. In fact, no one's asking for independence yet. The Americans are just asking for representation policy. In fact, we don't even know what are the Americans wanting here. What is it that they're fighting for? They just want their freedom. They want to be treated as equals, okay? So the Olive Branch Petition is sent to the king asking for return for benign neglect, not seeking independence, right? Now, letter B, are the colonies ready to fight a war against England? Explain what's missing that the colonies need in order to fight and win a war against England. So stop it, think for a second. Now, the answer to this is no. The colonies are not ready to fight a war with England because, as I just mentioned, Massachusetts is at war with England right now. The other 12 colonies aren't. And remember this, each colony saw themselves as an independent country. There's no such thing as the United States. It's 13 independent movements of various levels. Okay. And what's missing that the colonies need in order to fight is one, besides unity, is they need to declare what it is they're fighting for. What are you fighting for independence? Are you fighting to get your charter back? Are you fighting for the right to vote? I mean, what are you willing to die for? So what's missing is unity and independence. And that is brought up by this guy here, Thomas Paine, and his essay, Common Sense. Now, Thomas Paine, keep this in mind, is going to be one of the famous founding fathers for writing this, but he's not a landowner. He's not wealthy. In fact, he's a recent English immigrant who's actually quite poor. So, coming from England, he has a different point. He can look at the Americans from an English point of view and really understand how England looks at the colonists. And in his essay, he basically has three parts. One, he says, why is it that the American colonies are a larger nation than England, yet it's England, the smaller nation, that's ruling over a larger area. That just doesn't make sense. Another one is he says monarchy is a foolish type of government. How do you know that the person who's the firstborn to the queen is actually the best qualified to be the king? I mean, the idea back then was God selected that person to be there, and it was God's decision to make that individual the king, or that spiritual, that soul inside that person the king. But wouldn't democracy be better? And then lastly he says, look, Americans are not English. As an Englishman who's come to America, he understands that, look, the English look down on Americans. So why are you trying to fit in with a group of people that look down on you? Why don't you just go on your own way? So it's common sense that says that Americans should seek independence. Don't try to be part of the old corrupt world. Start your own new world and be better than before. Now, the importance of this was the most popular book in America at the time. It essentially went viral, right? It was read by hundreds of thousands of Americans. And even if you didn't read it, you went to the pub and people were talking about it. Okay. So this is leading a lot of Americans to start thinking for the first time, hey, maybe we should think about independence. Maybe we don't want to fight to be English and equal again, right? Now, evaluate judge. Is he correct in demanding that America should seek independence? Stop, think, write it down. Well, being that this is a judgment or evaluation, I mean, there's two sides you could go. I mean, one is he is correct in the sense that when America does become independent, it leads to America becoming one of arguably the most successful country in the history of the world. And American is able to develop a whole new form of government where people, not an elite, rule and make laws for themselves. Of course, the other side is if you're in California right now and we said, hey, we don't like the president or the way the country's going, and California can become independent, right? Are you willing to fight and die for California independence? And that's going to be a big factor for a lot of Americans. It's like, look, we're part of at that time, England is the richest, strongest country in the world, and you want to break away from being part of the richest, strongest country in the world, just as if today California were to break away from the United States. Would that really lead to a better life? And are you willing to fight and die for that? So the Second Continental Congress finally passes the Declaration of Independence. And the thing about the Declaration of Independence is it's two things. One, it states to the world why the colonies are declaring independence. We're, this is a relationship between England and America. And like in a relationship, you have to state the reasons why you're breaking up. So in the Declaration of Independence, it states the reasons why America is breaking up. But also in the preamble, what it does is it states what it means to be an American. That's why the Declaration of Independence is so important. The first idea of being an American is equality. All men are created equal, right? Now, what does equality mean? Well, keep this in mind. Equality does not mean we're all the same. Some people are smarter than others. Some people are better looking than others. Some people have more advantages than each other. But the idea here is the opportunity for all people, right, to do as well as they can based on their talent. The other idea of equality is that the law is the same for everybody. The law is the law. Letter D. Can you think of an example where the Americans failed to live up to this idea? Now, this has always been a factor about America, right? Is we always are we're a work in progress trying to bring more equality for all people. When America was first founded, you'll find at the very end, the last question, number 10, you can go back and find what the answer is for this. The other one is inalienable rights: life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. Those are the rights that every single American should enjoy. So if you're an American, you have a right to your life, you have a right to freedom, and you have a right to pursue your happiness, right? And what's important about that letter E is then what is the purpose of government? Answer that. So in this case, the purpose of government is to protect those rights. That's the purpose of that. That's government's job to protect your life through the military, to protect your liberty by making sure there's laws that you have your freedom, to protect your ability to have happiness. That's the job of government. And lastly, F, what if government does not enforce those rights? Do you remember? What can the people do if the government does not protect our life, liberty, and pursuit of happiness? Think. And the answer to that is people have a right to revolt, to overthrow that government, to change that government, right? This is based on John Locke's natural rights, life, liberty, and property, right? And no, it does not mean you have to have a revolution. You don't have to go out and kill people, right? Or impeach a president. Changing the government can be as simple as just voting. But it also means that if Americans aren't being treated fairly, we have the right, we get upset and we go out and we'll burn stuff. Now, fighting the war. Both sides had advantages and disadvantages. Now, England, the British, are the strongest country and the richest country in the world. Their advantage is they have money, they can pay for it, they have a professional army, and they have a navy. So even though or Britain is far, far away, they can bring supplies, they can bring troops, they can bring what they need. The disadvantage is the style of fighting that Europeans are used to is not going to work in the wilderness. Americans are going to hide in the trees, they're going to hide in the swamps, right? And force the English to find them. We're not going to meet them on big battlefields like they're used to doing in England. Now, for the Americans, our advantage is that the Americans are fighting for a cause or a belief. The British are there because they're being told to be there. The Americans that are fighting to get their freedom. Also, guerrilla warfare, home field advantage. When you fight guerrilla warfare, you use hit and run tactics. The only time you attack is when you have the advantage. You fight not to die, you fight to live. The problem for Americans is going to be obviously an inexperienced and small army, but this is the biggest one is loyalists, right? Loyalists are Americans that are against independence and they are not going to fight. So if you see the chart in the upper right-hand corner, you can see that patriots make up 40% of America. But loyalists are 20% to 40% in a sense. And also there's a neutrals, which are 40%. So 60% of Americans really either don't want independence or really don't care, right? So in this case, how does a weaker country defeat a stronger country? How will the American colonists win this war when there's a minority group fighting and they're a weaker power? Think about that for a second. And the answer to this is what you want to do is you want to protract the war, drag the war out until England quits. This is exactly what happened in the American Vietnam War, where after 10 years, Americans started questioning, why are we in Vietnam? To stop communism. Do Americans have to die to do this? Maybe not. Or do we care if they're communists or not? Well, the same thing here for a lot of Brits. Why are Brits dying in America? So England can trade with America. Well, wait, if America becomes independent, can England still trade with America? Well, yes. Then why do we have to fight and die when we can just let them be free and trade anyway? So for a lot of Brits, hey, just drag this on until Britain says, you know what, let's just let them be and we'll trade with them again. Now, one major battle America did win, because a lot of fighting is guerrilla warfare, is the Battle of Saratoga. And it's the first major victory of the war for the U.S. And it shows that America could win this war if we got a little help. And this is when France sides with the United States against England. Now, why would France want to get involved? Remember why France would maybe want to help America. Think. And the reason why here is France wants to get back to England for losing the French Indian War. So even though Americans and English soldiers fought together against France just 13 years earlier, about now France is siding with Americans, and some Americans are rather bitter about it because France has always been our historical enemy. But for France, it's an opportunity to get back to England and have England lose their favorite colonies. Now, another battle that ends the war is the Battle of Yorktown in Virginia. And this is when Cornwall surrenders to Washington. Now, the Treaty of Paris of 1783, another Treaty of Paris. There's the Treaty of Paris of 1763, which ended the French Indian War, and another Treaty of Paris in 1783, which ends the Revolutionary War. And what you need to understand about this is England recognizes American independence. That's one. Also, look at the borders. You can see in the map on the upper right-hand corner in green, it is basically the present-day border with Canada. It's the Mississippi River in the west, and in the south, Spain gets Florida back. Now, this is important. Remember this. Who declared independence? The 13 colonies declared independence. And how did each colony look at themselves as being? As an independent country. So you can see the names of the 13 colonies on the map on the far right side, yet there's a lot of green there with no names on it. It's just extra land. That is just free land that the British gave to the American colonies. Say, hey, here's a bunch of land. If you guys want this extra land. So even though, say, Massachusetts or New York or North Carolina, they're up on the coast, here's all this land inland. Why was England so generous with the Americans after they lost the war and said, hey, I know we lost, but here's a whole bunch of land. Hope you guys like it. Why was England being so generous? Think about that. And the reason why England was so generous in giving America more land than they were actually asking for is that one, England was afraid that the United States would become friends with France. Our new BFF is France. And Britain's like, look, we still want to trade with the colonies. They're our number one trading partner, right? So they want to keep good relations so trade would continue. Another important thing is that England figured America as the first democracy where regular people were going to run the country would definitely fail. And when America failed, England wanted to make sure that America would come back to the British Empire. It's kind of like having a breakup and someone walking away and say, hey, baby, let's be friends, but I know one day that you're going to come back to me. And that was Britain's attitude here, is that one day, America, you will fail. And when you fail, we'll take you back in and we got your back. Now, how did the war impact the lives of American women? And how did the war impact the lives of African Americans? Remember, because you've got women and African Americans living in America. Well, the Revolutionary War changed their lives by doing nothing. It basically didn't change things for either group. Women, you can see in the upper left hand corner, still have very little rights and they are subservient to their husbands. In fact, what it's called in a feeble attempt to try to make women feel like, hey, you're important too, it's called Republican motherhood. Women, their role in society, they couldn't vote, they can't run for politics, but they can raise the next generation of patriots by teaching democratic values to their children. And then their children and their sons, they'll go out there and make life good for women, okay? But women have no democratic rights. And also, African Americans, well, they're still slaves. They had zero rights. I mean, some African Americans fought in the war for the Patriots, but more fought for the Brits, as you can see in the image in the middle there, because the British were saying, well, we could end slavery, but basically they don't have any rights. So here's the thing then, who was the Revolutionary War for? Who had rights and why them? So think about that. What group of people had rights? Be specific. And the answer to who had rights were white land owning males. Not all white males. You have to own land, which wasn't hard in America to do anyways, because there's so much available land. Because remember, the purpose of government is to protect your natural rights. And one of those natural rights is property. So people who own property have to make sure that the government, that they have a say in the government in order to protect their own property. Now, here's something though. I mean, that makes sense. Like, okay, yeah, you need to have property. Well, why should people who don't own property also be protected? Why is saying you have to own property, you know, why is that short sighted? Well, the answer to why people who have property and people who don't have property, everybody needs to be protected, is that people still need someone to protect them from others who want to mistreat other people or themselves, right? The government's job, besides property, is to protect your life. And if you are part of a minority group, you need the government to protect you as well too. So the government, this is basically saying you the government in a democracy does not just protect the majority, it protects the majority and the minority. Okay. And in this case, people without property are the minority and they need to be protected from a group, the majority, landowning people that might want to harm their rights. So, when you think about this, let's evaluate the success of the American Revolution. What were the two reasons the colonists rebelled against England in the first place? Well, one was to end British control of the colonies by an elite group, right? Basically independence. That was the that was the social revolution, right? Um, or the that was the actually imperial revolution, right? And then the other one is to democratize society. That's the social revolution, right? So one, those that's why more people can vote. and end British rule. Yay! Now, did that really change? Was the idea of an elite running the country, did that really change? Of course not. Look above me, above the lecture. The founding fathers, you see some of our founding fathers right there, right? The people that made the laws were the richest people in the country. So all we did in America was replace the British elite with an American elite. Oh, and by the way, this American elite, their ideas have come from basically the British as well too. So we've just gone from the old boss to a new boss who believe in the exact same thing. And also, the other one, was America more democratic because of the Revolutionary War? Well, this goes to the question, I believe, the fourth question we had earlier. Who are some people who do not have equality in America? Well, let's think. Who still can't vote? Women can't vote. Blacks can't vote. Native Americans can't vote. And white males that don't own land, they cannot vote. So basically, before the Revolutionary War, the only people who could vote were landowning males. And after the American Revolution, the only people who can vote are landowning males. So basically, when the war was over, we were no more democratic than we were before. And also, we went from the idea of an elite running the country to another elite. So then, what's changed and what's better? Well, the difference now is, as I said earlier, America is now an independent sovereign nation, and it's free to run itself and to try to make itself a more perfect union. And those groups, women, blacks, Native Americans, poor people in America, are going to have, as time goes on, a greater say in this country. Thank you for listening, and have a good day, guys.